Hi everyone and welcome to this video where we will tackle a problem related to an allowance for doubtful accounts. In this problem we have Krell Computers that categorizes its accounts receivable into 4 age groups for the purposes of estimating its allowance for uncollectible accounts. And then we have some information about the breakdown that they're referring to in the first sentence. And then it says, what should be the balance in Krell's allowance for uncollectible accounts? Remember, we have an account that is called accounts receivable. Accounts receivable capture amounts owed to a company by its customers. A product or service is delivered to a customer and the company allows the customer to pay later, usually within 30 days. That's what an accounts receivable is. Now, the accounting rules say that you can't count something as an accounts receivable if it's unlikely that the customer is going to pay you. So you might sell something to a customer and say, pay us later. But once you realize that that customer, for whatever reason, is not going to fulfill their promise to pay you, and it happens unfortunately. Let's say a company enters into financial difficulty and they're in bankruptcy and they can't pay for the product that they bought uh, 2, 3 months ago. That would be a case where we have an amount owed to us, but it's highly unlikely that we're going to be able to collect that from the customer. And the financial accounting rules, which we call GAAP, generally accepted accounting principles, what those rules say is that if it's unlikely for you to collect the money from the customer, you can't count that as an asset. So to address this rule, what we have to do is we have to estimate what portion of our accounts receivable will ultimately be uncollectible. And the reason we have to estimate it is because if we knew before we sold something to a customer that the customer was not going to pay, we would have never given the product or service to the customer in the first place. So at the time of the sale, we really don't have an idea of who's going to pay and who is not going to pay. But we have data that tells us, based on past transactions, what types of things would be indicators that the customer might not pay. And so this breakdown that you see on the screen, what they're saying is, based on past history, when we have an amount that hasn't yet hit its due date, the customer has not yet hit the due date for when they have to pay, about 5% of those, based on history, ultimately end up not being collected. And then as you go all the way out to bills that are 60 days past their due date, the customer has hit their due date for when they have to pay, and they still have not paid 60 days after that due date. So these types of accounts, these types of customers are pretty unlikely to pay. And so based on our history, we estimate that about 30% of those types of bills that are 60 days past their due date, I don't know why this says clays, this is days, accounts more than 60 days past their due date, 30% of those ultimately will not be collected. So we have to come up with what we call an allowance for uncollectible accounts. And the allowance for uncollectible accounts is a contra asset account, which means it's a negative value asset account, like accumulated depreciation, which you saw before, and captures the company's estimate for the portion of its accounts receivable that will not be collected from the customer. Okay, that is the allowance for doubtful accounts. The way we estimate this is very, very simple. All that we have to do is take each one of these dollar amounts and multiply it by its corresponding estimate uncollectible or estimated uncollectible. So this is like a probability. Probability of it not being collected is 5% here, right? So we could just do this calculation very quickly. And so we're going to need a 1, 2, 3, 4 column table, and we're going to need about 6 rows. So I don't want it there. Let's undo that. So we're going to do 4 by 6, insert table, 4 columns, 6 rows. Okay. So we're going to have different categories. So this is going to be not yet due. This is going to be bills that are 1 to 30 days past their due date. And then we're going to have 31 to 60 days. And then we're going to have greater than 60 days. And then in this column, we're going to have the accounts receivable amount. And then we're going to have the estimated uncollectible percentage. And then the last column will be the estimated uncollectible dollar amount. Okay. So in each category here, we have 60,000 not yet due, 60,000, and 5% of that is estimated as uncollectible. And then 1 to 30 days, we're going to have 15,000 at 10%. And then 31 to 60 days will be 10,000 at 20%. 10,000 at 20%. And the last one here is greater than 60 days past due, 5,000 at 30%. 5,000 at 30%. So now all we have to do is say, what is 60,000 times 5%? 60,000 times 5% is 3,000. And 15,000 times 5% is $1,500. And 10,000 times 20% is $2,000. And 5,000 times 30% is $1,500. We'll add those up, and this number here, which would be the total of these amounts, will be our solution to the problem, because we're trying to estimate what should be the balance of the allowance for uncollectible accounts. So we just need a single number, and the single number is here, and that would be our answer. I'm going to leave it up to you to figure out what that number is, and you can reply in the comments below, and I'll tell you if you are correct. The problem doesn't ask for this, but what ends up happening from here is once we calculate that amount, we're going to do a journal entry, and it's going to be debit bad debt expense, which will go in the income statement, and credit allowance for doubtful accounts, which is a contra asset. And the amount that we put in here comes from, it comes from the amount up here from the table. All right, so I'll just indicate that here with a highlight. And so these question marks are for the same amount. The number that we calculate in that table is the number that we use in the journal entry. And again, remember, the problem is not asking for the journal entry, but if you wanted to know what happens once we calculate that number, this would be the journal entry the company would record to capture its estimate of what is uncollectible. Well, that's it for this video. I hope you found it helpful. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll talk to you soon.